James walked into the luxury mall in his hoodie and sneakers, sketchpad in hand. He wasn't there to shop, just to dream, but the smirk from the security guard, followed by the sneer, made it clear this wasn't a place for someone like him. What no one realized, least of all the guard, was that the kid they judged so quickly would soon own it all. James adjusted his hoodie and stepped into the luxury mall, his sneakers making soft echoes against the gleaming marble floors. The smell of polished leather and expensive cologne lingered in the air, a testament to the kind of crowd that frequented this upscale location. Designer boutiques lined the walls, their window displays sparkling under bright, perfectly positioned lights. Shoppers moved briskly, many carrying glossy bags, their designer attire and polished shoes reflecting the wealth the space catered to. James, dressed in his plain hoodie and jeans, stood out like a sore thumb. Clutching his sketch pad filled with sneaker designs, James took a deep breath. The mall wasn't just a place to shop for him, it was a wellspring of inspiration. He loved observing the intricacy of store layouts and the patterns on high-end shoes. Today he planned to soak in ideas for his own future designs. But even as he walked, he could feel the subtle glances from a few shoppers. Their quiet whispers followed him. Perched near the entrance was Mitch, the mall's security guard. With his broad shoulders and clipped buzz cut, Mitch had the kind of commanding presence that could intimidate anyone. Dressed sharply in his uniform, Mitch was the type who took his job seriously, perhaps too seriously. He narrowed his eyes as he watched James stroll in. To him, James wasn't a customer. He was someone who didn't belong. James lingered outside a luxury watch boutique, studying its gleaming gold and glass display. Mitch's interest piqued immediately. With a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, he decided to step in. Walking toward James, he spoke in a tone that dripped with condescension. "Can I help you, kid?" he asked. "You seem lost." Startled but calm, James turned to Mitch. "No, I'm good, just gathering ideas for my designs," he replied politely. Mitch raised an eyebrow and scoffed. "Designs, huh? Maybe stick to stores you can afford," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. A couple of heads turned, some eyebrows raised in disapproval of Mitch's behavior. James felt the sting of humiliation rise in his chest, but he swallowed it down. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice steady, refusing to match Mitch's tone. Mitch let out a dismissive laugh, crossing his arms as James walked away. "Sure you're not," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for anyone nearby to catch it. The moment lingered. James could feel the weight of the eyes on him, the judgment in the air. But he squared his shoulders and walked toward the next store, determined not to let Mitch's attitude dampen his mood. Unbeknownst to Mitch, this was just the beginning of a story he would never forget. James wandered deeper into the mall, his eyes scanning the sleek displays and vibrant colors of high-end boutiques. But no matter where he went, he could feel the weight of Mitch's gaze following him. It wasn't subtle. Every few steps, James caught sight of Mitch hovering nearby, his radio pressed to his lips, speaking in low tones. Inside his booth near the entrance, Mitch smirked as he updated a coworker. "Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on him. Kid thinks he's got some business here. Probably just waiting for a chance to cause trouble," Mitch said, his tone filled with mockery. James tried to ignore the watchful eyes as he walked into a high-end sneaker boutique. The gleaming white walls showcased rows of limited edition shoes displayed like works of art. A soft, jazzy tune played in the background, the perfect ambiance for a store that catered to serious collectors. He approached one of the displays, admiring a pair of sneakers with intricate stitching and bold accents. His fingers brushed the side of the sole as he whispered, "Beautiful design, seamless construction." But before James could ask the clerk a question, Mitch appeared in the doorway like an unwelcome shadow. "Hey," Mitch said, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "You might want to look somewhere else. These sneakers aren't exactly budget-friendly." James stiffened but kept his tone polite. "I'm just looking, appreciating the craftsmanship," he replied, gesturing toward the sneakers. Mitch raised an eyebrow and turned to the store clerk. "Watch this one," he said loud enough for the entire store to hear. The air grew thick with tension. Shoppers paused to glance at James. Some raised eyebrows while others smirked as if Mitch's words confirmed their assumptions. James felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said quietly, his voice firm but calm. "Uh-huh," Mitch replied, leaning casually against the wall. "Well, unless you're buying, don't waste their time." James placed the sneaker back gently and turned to the store clerk. "Thanks anyway," he said, his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. As James walked out, Mitch's triumphant smirk followed him. That's what I thought, he muttered, shaking his head. A few customers lingered by the entrance, their eyes flicking between James and Mitch. One older man whispered to his wife, "That kid didn't deserve that," but no one stepped forward to intervene. Outside the store, James leaned against the railing of the mall's central atrium, clutching his sketchpad tightly. He looked down at the intricate designs he'd drawn just hours earlier. Each line, each detail, was filled with hope and ambition. But now doubt crept in. Maybe I don't belong here, he thought, staring at the polished marble floors beneath his feet. The feeling of being out of place weighed heavily on him. But then James straightened up. A voice echoed in his mind, his father's words, "You belong wherever you choose to be." He glanced at Mitch one last time, catching the guard chuckling with another employee. James turned and walked toward the exit, his head held high. He wasn't sure how, but he knew this moment wasn't the end of the story. James stormed into his home, the usual comfort of its warm, earthy tones doing little to ease his frustration. He dropped his sketch pad onto the coffee table, collapsing onto the couch with a long sigh. His father, Mr. Bennett, glanced up from the kitchen island where he was nursing a cup of coffee. "Rough day?" his father asked, his voice steady yet concerned. James hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's nothing," he mumbled. But Mr. Bennett knew better. "James," he said firmly, setting his cup down and walking over. "Talk to me." James exhaled deeply, the anger and humiliation bubbling to the surface. "The security guard at the mall," he began, his words clipped. "He treated me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't good enough to even be there." Mr. Bennett's expression hardened, but he remained silent, letting his son vent. "I didn't dress the part. I didn't look the way they wanted me to," James continued. "I was just there to learn, to get inspired. Instead, I got humiliated." There was a pause before Mr. Bennett spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "Do you believe him? That you don't belong?" James looked up, startled. "Of course not," he said, his voice firm but wavering slightly. "Good," Mr. Bennett replied, "because you belong wherever you choose to be. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The tension eased slightly from James's shoulders, but his father wasn't done. He gestured toward the couch, signaling James to sit. "There's something you don't know," Mr. Bennett began, his tone taking on a hint of amusement. "That mall? Our family has a silent stake in it." James blinked in surprise. "Wait, what?" "I invested in that mall years ago," Mr. Bennett explained. "I wanted to ensure spaces like that supported diversity, people from all walks of life. But there's more. We're in the middle of talks to acquire a controlling stake." James stared, the weight of the revelation sinking in. "So, we could own it?" Mr. Bennett nodded, his eyes sharp. "But the question is, what do you want to do about this?" James thought for a moment, his earlier anger giving way to a sense of purpose. "Let's move forward with the deal," he said, his voice steady. "But let's keep it quiet for now. I want to show them the power of respect, not revenge." Mr. Bennett's lips curved into a proud smile. "That's my boy." The next morning, James found himself in a sleek, glass-walled corporate office. He sat beside his father, watching as a team of lawyers and executives discussed the final terms of the acquisition. James listened intently, absorbing every detail. He watched his father navigate the room with confidence, negotiating with precision and grace. For the first time, James saw the immense power of composure. The deal closed faster than expected. Mr. Bennett shook hands with the regional director, sealing their place as the mall's majority stakeholders. As they left the meeting, Mr. Bennett turned to James. "This is your chance to lead," he said. "How do you want to handle things from here?" James's mind raced, but one idea stood out. "Let's keep the ownership under wraps for now," he said. "I want to see how the mall operates without the staff knowing. And when the time's right, we'll make our presence known." Mr. Bennett nodded in agreement. "You're thinking like a leader, James." For the next week, James and Mr. Bennett worked behind the scenes, quietly observing the mall's operations. James noticed how the staff interacted with customers, noting moments of kindness and moments that mirrored his own experience with Mitch. As the days passed, James's confidence grew. He knew the moment of reckoning was approaching, but he wanted to ensure it wasn't about vengeance. It was about transformation. One evening, as he sat with his sketch pad in hand, James sketched out a vision, not just for sneakers, but for what the mall could become. A place where everyone felt welcome. A place where dreams were nurtured, not dismissed. Looking at the sketch, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about setting an example. The mall hummed with its usual bustle of shoppers and staff, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath its polished surface. For most, it was just another busy Saturday. Designer bags, coffee cups, and the faint sound of luxury music playing overhead. But for James, this was the day everything would change. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the mall's main entrance, its glossy finish reflecting the sunlight. As the doors opened, James stepped out, dressed in a sharp navy suit tailored to perfection. His father, Mr. Bennett, followed close behind, exuding the composed authority that James had always admired. Inside the mall, the staff continued their routines, oblivious to the significance of this moment. Mitch stood at his usual post near the luxury watch store, scanning the crowd with his usual air of authority. When his eyes landed on James, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Wait a second," Mitch muttered to himself. "That's the kid from last week. What's he doing dressed like that?" James walked through the mall's marble-lined corridors, his every step purposeful. The once casual teen now moved with the confidence of someone who belonged, because today he did. Customers turned their heads as whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "Isn't that the guy from before?" one shopper murmured. "Who is he, though? He looks, important," another added. Mitch, sensing the shift in the air, adjusted his posture and approached James, still trying to piece together what was happening. "Uh, can I help you?" he asked, his voice hesitant, a far cry from the condescension of their last encounter. James stopped, locking eyes with him. A small, knowing smile played on his lips. "Not yet," he said simply before walking past Mitch and toward the central plaza. At the heart of the mall, Mr. Bennett had already arranged for a staff meeting. Security guards, store managers, clerks, everyone was summoned. Employees shuffled in, murmuring to each other, wondering what was going on. Mitch lingered at the back, his curiosity and unease growing by the second. When the crowd had gathered, Mr. Bennett stepped onto a small stage, microphone in hand. His commanding presence silenced the chatter almost instantly. "Good afternoon, everyone," Mr. Bennett began, his voice carrying through the room. "Many of you may not know who I am, but I've been a part of this mall's story for quite some time." The staff exchanged puzzled glances. Mitch folded his arms, still trying to make sense of it all. "But today isn't about me," Mr. Bennett continued. "It's about someone else, someone who represents the future of this mall." With that, he gestured toward James, who stepped forward. The room fell silent as he took the microphone. "My name is James Bennett," he said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "And as of this week, my family owns this mall." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mitch's arms dropped to his sides, his face draining of color. The young man he had dismissed and humiliated now stood before him as his employer. James continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "Last week, I walked through these halls as a customer. Just a kid with big dreams and a sketch pad. But instead of feeling welcome, I felt judged. I was treated like I didn't belong." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Some staff members looked down at their shoes, guilt washing over them. Mitch shifted uncomfortably, the realization dawning on him. "I'm not here to single anyone out," James said, his tone firm but forgiving. "I'm here to make sure no one else feels that way again. This mall is more than just a business. It's a place for ideas, for inspiration, and for everyone who walks through those doors." Applause broke out among the crowd, a mix of awe and respect filling the room. Even Mitch couldn't deny the power of James's words. After the meeting, James stayed behind, speaking with staff members and answering questions. Mitch hesitated before approaching him, his usual bravado nowhere to be seen. "James, Mr. Bennett," Mitch began, his voice low. I owe you an apology. For everything." James met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Apologies are a start," he said, "but what matters is what you do next." Mitch nodded, his face a mix of shame and determination. As the crowd dispersed, James stood in the plaza, looking around at the place he now called his own. He felt a sense of fulfillment, not because he had proven Mitch wrong, but because he had taken the high road. This wasn't just a victory. It was a new beginning. The staff meeting was over, but its impact lingered in the air. Employees murmured among themselves as they returned to their posts, stealing glances at James and his father. The buzz of the reveal still rippled through the mall, like the aftershocks of an earthquake. But Mitch wasn't moving. He stood frozen in the central plaza, replaying James's words in his mind. His chest tightened as guilt began to sink in. He knew James's story wasn't just a speech, it was aimed at him. The quiet teen Mitch had dismissed just days ago had turned out to be the boss. Mitch swallowed hard, summoning the courage to approach James, who was now speaking with a small group of staff. His polished suit and poised demeanor were a stark contrast to the kid in the hoodie Mitch had treated so poorly. For the first time, Mitch felt the full weight of his actions. James, Mr. Bennett? Mitch called out hesitantly as the crowd around James dispersed. James turned to face him, his expression calm but unreadable. Yes? Mitch cleared his throat. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by nervous energy. I want to apologize for how I treated you the other day. I was out of line. I made assumptions, and that was wrong. Really wrong. James studied him for a moment, his piercing gaze making Mitch shift uncomfortably. Finally, James spoke, his tone measured but firm. Apologies are a good first step, Mitch, but they're just words. What matters is how you move forward. Mitch nodded quickly. I understand. I'll do better. I promise. James paused, then extended his hand. All right, let's see what you can do. The handshake was brief, but it carried a weight that Mitch didn't take lightly. He walked away, still processing the moment. As the day went on, James observed the mall staff with a sharper eye. He noticed how some employees seemed more introspective, their conversations quieter. The reality of the new ownership and the values it represented was sinking in. By the time the afternoon rolled around, the atmosphere in the mall had shifted. Shoppers appeared more at ease, the tension of the morning replaced by curiosity and even excitement. James stopped by the sneaker boutique where his earlier humiliation had taken place. The clerk who had witnessed Mitch's behavior the week before approached him nervously. Mr. Bennett, she began, I just wanted to say, I wish I'd spoken up when I saw what happened. It wasn't right, and I should have done more. James smiled, his expression softening. It's not easy to stand up in the moment, but recognizing it now is a start. Thank you. Meanwhile, Mitch found himself taking small but significant steps. He greeted customers with more sincerity, offered assistance without judgment, and made a conscious effort to check his biases. He still felt the sting of his mistakes, but he was determined to prove to himself and to James that he could change. At the end of the day, James sat in the mall's office with his father, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. I think today went well, Mr. Bennett said, his voice full of pride. James nodded, his gaze thoughtful. It's a start, but there's a lot more work to do. Mr. Bennett placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You handled yourself with grace, James. That's leadership, not just taking charge, but inspiring others to be better. James looked out the office window at the bustling mall below. He didn't just see a business, he saw potential. Potential for growth, for inclusivity, for change. And in that moment, James knew this was more than just about proving a point. It was about creating a space where respect wasn't optional. It was the foundation. The transformation of the mall wasn't just a change in ownership. It was a shift in philosophy. James knew the space had to become more than a luxurious shopping destination. It had to feel inclusive, alive, and connected to the community. Within days, the rebranding efforts began. The first step was a name change. The mall was officially renamed Bennett Square, a nod to the family's vision of creating a gathering place where everyone belonged. Below the sleek, modern sign hung a tagline in bold letters, a place for everyone. The redesign wasn't just cosmetic. James worked with a team of designers to bring his vision to life. The stark, unwelcoming atmosphere was replaced with vibrant murals created by local artists. Each piece told a story of community, diversity, and resilience. Pops of greenery filled the space, transforming the mall into a welcoming environment that felt warm and refreshing. But James didn't stop there. He wanted the mall to reflect his passion for creativity and innovation. The center court, once an unused open space, was turned into a dynamic hub for events. The first event James launched? A sneaker design workshop. It was an instant hit. Aspiring designers of all ages gathered with sketchpads and laptops, eager to learn the craft. James himself participated, offering tips and encouraging participants. The crowd was buzzing with excitement as attendees realized they weren't just learning, they were being inspired. Mitch watched from a distance, observing the joy and energy that filled the mall. He had never seen the space like this before, and he couldn't deny that James's vision was working. Of course, not everyone embraced the changes right away. Some employees, like Mitch, were resistant at first, but James had made it clear this wasn't optional. All staff were required to undergo customer service training, focusing on empathy and respect. For Mitch, the training was humbling. Sitting in a room with his coworkers, he was forced to confront the biases that had shaped his behavior. During one exercise, the facilitator asked, "Have you ever judged someone based on how they looked or what they wore?" Mitch's stomach tightened as he recalled his interactions with James. When it was his turn to share, Mitch hesitated. Then in a quiet voice, he admitted, "I did. And I was wrong." The room fell silent, but instead of judgment, Mitch saw nods of understanding from his colleagues. It was a turning point, not just for him, but for the team as a whole. Meanwhile, James focused on fostering connections with the community. He launched initiatives to support local businesses, offering discounted spaces for minority-owned vendors and pop-up shops. The response was overwhelming. Vendors who had once struggled to find visibility were now thriving in the bustling mall. One of the most impactful changes was the introduction of monthly charity drives. Each month, the mall partnered with a local organization to raise funds and awareness for causes like education, housing, and food insecurity. Shoppers were encouraged to donate, and in return, they received discounts at participating stores. James also made it a point to connect with customers. He could often be found walking through the mall, chatting with shoppers and taking note of their feedback. His approachable nature earned him respect from staff and patrons alike. One afternoon, James stopped by the sneaker boutique that had been the site of his earlier humiliation. The clerk who had witnessed the incident greeted him with a smile. "Mr. Bennett, it's great to see you," she said. James returned the smile. "Call me James, and thank you for being kind that day, even when others weren't." The clerk blushed, grateful for the acknowledgement. As weeks turned into months, the mall began to flourish in ways no one had expected. Foot traffic increased, and the atmosphere transformed into one of excitement and belonging. Families gathered for community events, friends lingered over coffee in the revamped food court, and young entrepreneurs found a platform to showcase their talents. Mitch, too, underwent a transformation. The once aloof and judgmental guard became a familiar face at community events, helping out and connecting with customers. He began to understand what James meant when he said respect wasn't optional. It was essential. By the end of the first quarter under James's leadership, Bennett Square had become a shining example of what a mall could be. Not just a place to shop, but a space to grow, connect, and create. As James looked out over the bustling crowd during a charity event, his father approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've turned this place into something special, son," Mr. Bennett said. James smiled, his eyes scanning the lively scene. "This is just the beginning." Bennett Square was no longer just a mall, it was a movement. Word of the transformation spread like wildfire, carried by social media posts, local news segments, and word of mouth from loyal customers. The narrative of a young entrepreneur turning a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for change resonated deeply. Headlines proclaimed, "Teen turns prejudice into progress," and Bennett Square becomes a community beacon. The world took notice. Shoppers from all walks of life flocked to the mall. Families brought their children to the workshops. Students found inspiration at community art exhibits. And small business owners saw their dreams come to life in the form of bustling pop-up shops. The energy was electric, a buzz of positivity and growth that hadn't been there before. Even national outlets began to cover the story. A popular news anchor interviewed James and Mr. Bennett, their conversation focusing on the vision behind the changes. "Why was it so important for you to make this transformation?" the anchor asked. James answered with the confidence and humility that had become his trademark. "Because spaces like this should belong to everyone. No one should feel like they don't deserve to be here just because of how they look or what they wear." The interview went viral, further cementing James's reputation as not just a leader, but a role model. Inside the mall, the shift was palpable. Employees who had once been indifferent to their jobs now took pride in their roles. They greeted customers warmly, eager to make everyone feel welcome. Mitch, the security guard who had once been the source of so much tension, had undergone one of the most remarkable transformations. At first, Mitch had been reluctant to embrace the changes. The training sessions felt unnecessary to him, and he resented being singled out for his past behavior. But as he spent more time listening to customers and learning about their experiences, his perspective began to shift. One day during a particularly busy weekend, Mitch noticed a young boy lingering near the entrance of the sneaker boutique. The boy was clutching a well-worn sketch pad, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked at the sneakers on display. Mitch approached him, his tone kind. "Hey there, buddy. What's in the sketch pad?" The boy hesitated before showing Mitch his drawings, rough but creative designs for sneakers. Mitch nodded, impressed. "These are great. You ever think about showing them to someone?" The boy shook his head. "I don't think anyone would care." Mitch crouched down to meet his eyes. "Listen, kid, everyone starts somewhere. You've got something special here. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." It was a full circle moment for Mitch, and one that didn't go unnoticed by James. Meanwhile, the mall's rebranding began to inspire other businesses in the area. Neighboring shops implemented their own community initiatives, partnering with Bennett Square to create a network of support for local entrepreneurs. The ripple effect extended beyond the mall, transforming the entire district into a hub of creativity and inclusion. James watched it all with quiet pride, but he knew the real work wasn't about headlines or recognition. It was about sustaining the change. One evening, as he walked through the mall, James spotted Mitch helping an elderly shopper carry her bags to her car. The once gruff guard now wore a genuine smile, his actions speaking volumes about his transformation. When Mitch returned, James stopped him. "You're doing good work, Mitch. I see it." Mitch smiled sheepishly. "Thanks, boss. I'm just trying to make up for lost time." James clapped him on the shoulder. "It's not about the past. It's about what you do moving forward. Keep it up." Bennett Square was thriving, but more importantly, it had become a symbol, a reminder that with respect and vision, even the most unlikely places could become beacons of hope. Bennett Square wasn't just a mall anymore. It was a landmark of change. Each corner of the space buzzed with life, energy, and stories. The once sterile, unwelcoming atmosphere was now vibrant and inclusive, drawing people from all walks of life. James stood at the entrance one sunny afternoon, watching the activity unfold. A line had formed for the weekly design workshop, kids clutching sketch pads and sneakers with eyes full of ambition. A local artist was setting up her pop-up shop, displaying hand-painted sneakers that gleamed with creativity. Near the food court, a group of teens laughed while enjoying a meal from a newly opened family-run restaurant. James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the vision he and his father had dreamed of, a place where everyone could feel like they belonged. Mitch walked up beside him, carrying a stack of brochures for an upcoming community fundraiser the mall was hosting. His transformation had been remarkable, and James couldn't help but smile. "Place looks good, huh?" Mitch said, his tone light but proud. James nodded. "It looks like home," Mitch chuckled. "I guess you're right. Hard to believe where we started." Their conversation was interrupted by a young boy who ran up to James. "Mr. Bennett," he exclaimed, holding up a sneaker he had designed at last week's workshop. "I wanted to show you my new one. What do you think?" James crouched down, taking the sneaker and examining it with care. "This is incredible," he said sincerely. "You've got real talent. Keep working, and I'll see your designs on shelves someday." The boy beamed, running back to his parents, who waved at James with gratitude. As the day unfolded, James walked the length of the mall, greeting shop owners, chatting with customers, and soaking in the joy radiating from every interaction. A few hours later, he joined his father in the executive office. Mr. Bennett had been going over quarterly reports, and the numbers were astounding. Revenue was up, foot traffic had doubled, and the mall had become a shining example of what retail spaces could be when they prioritize people over profits. "Your vision worked, son," Mr. Bennett said, sliding the reports across the desk. James smiled, but his mind was already on what was next. "It's not just about the numbers, Dad. It's about the impact. We've got to make sure this keeps growing." His father nodded. "I couldn't be prouder of you. What's the next step?" James leaned back in his chair. "Isrania, I want to expand the workshops, maybe partner with schools or community centers. There's so much more we can do to give back." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mitch stepped in, looking sheepish but determined. "Hey, I just wanted to say thanks," Mitch began, "for everything. You didn't have to give me a second chance, but you did. It means more than I can say." James stood and shook Mitch's hand firmly. "You earned it, Mitch. Keep doing the right thing, and that's all the thanks I need." A few weeks later, the mall hosted its largest event yet, a festival celebrating young creators. The atrium was filled with booths showcasing art, music, and fashion, all from local talents who had found a platform thanks to Bennett Square. As the event came to a close, James stood on stage to address the crowd. "This isn't just a mall," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's a community. It's a place where anyone with a dream can find support, where respect and kindness are the foundation of everything we do. Thank you for being part of this journey." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the space. As James stepped off the stage, he caught sight of Mitch helping a customer with genuine kindness, the once arrogant security guard now a model of respect and service. James smiled, feeling the weight of the journey behind him but excited for the road ahead. Bennett Square had become more than he'd ever imagined, a legacy of leadership, vision, and change.